I I believe it's important to visit people in prison, and I don't think it's important to worry about if they're guilty or they're innocent. I think that the focus needs to be just visiting them, and I believe in my faith that we're called to visit people in prison. The judicial system is the ones that control whether they're going to get more time or less time or whatever. We're just called to visit people. I had a dear friend of mine who was a conservative Republican guy, got arrested, and went and saw him. I was worried about him. One of the things I did when I saw him in prison is I lied down in his cell. I lied in his cot. And I looked at the pictures of his family had taped up. And part of that is I just wanted to try to feel he was feeling. And he made a mistake, but I don't judge him for that. I make mistakes. But I really wanted to try to be there for him and be a resource to him and to his family. Anyway, years went by, and had done some volunteer work with former Congresswoman Corinne Brown. And she had helped me a lot with historically black colleges, but she got arrested, investigated by the FBI, and so she was sentenced to prison at Coleman, the federal prison right in Central Florida. And so I went and visited her. I went and visited her, a former member of U.S. Congress who was a liberal Democrat. Again, I'm a conservative Republican, and I visited her in prison. So what was it like going to Coleman and visiting a former member of U.S. Congress in prison? Well, a couple things I'll tell you. First off, she was the most amazing inmate I've ever met. I've met a lot of people in prison and done that work, and I've seen and heard some depressing and sad stories. And I've seen people who I've really thought were repentant, if you will, and trying to make their lives better. And I met people who are really in denial. But I've never had this happen. When I met with her in prison, she spent the entire time wanting me to meet other inmates. She wanted me to meet other women that were there and hear their stories and learn about them. I met two different women that were doctors who had gotten arrested for nonviolent crimes and were sentenced in prison for basically their entire, life, not their full life, but their working life as doctors, And I remember thinking our judicial system is broken. And when I tried to really talk to her about herself, how she was doing, she kept trying to get me to focus on how to care for the other inmates there. I was really, really amazed by it. And so when I got out of that situation, I went on social media and I commented about how I really thought it would be good for President Trump to pardon her and for her to get out. And my reasoning for that was she'd already lost re-election. She's in her 70s. She's in bad health. She'd already served 2 years. And I really felt like, that was probably a good thing to have happen. What was fascinating was the hate mail after that story broke. And the hate mail, it did not break Republican, Democrat. It did not break Christian, non-Christian. It broke black and white. I met with a former major member of Congress, big-time leader, who was a black Republican, and he totally backed me on her getting out. And I went with Democrats and Republicans that were black, absolutely wanted her out. When I met with Democrats, I remember with the whites, if they were Republican or Democrat, they wanted her in. The Republicans really kind of had a policy of saying, well, she did the crime, she got to serve the time. The Democrats, on the other hand, they wanted her in because they had fear that if Trump pardoned her, that would help Trump win re-election. And so, when I hear me talk about principles over power, they were willing to make sure she stayed in prison, even though she'd done a lot for the Democratic Party, because they didn't want a chance that might help Trump. And I actually had some very harsh words from some people on that. So it really taught me a lot in that process. It did end up getting out, and actually her conviction got overturned. And so she's at home now, and I'm really happy for her. But that process was really fascinating to me, that I really was trying to do what I thought was right as a human, which was visiting my friend in prison and trying to bring a little light in a very dark place and be helpful, and then really try to have like an honest conversation about criminal justice reform. But how the sides broke on that was very, very fascinating and really pointed some other things that we need to talk about. So I always come back to, it's like that's another one of those topics that at Crossman Career Builders we like to talk about and try to create space for. And we also try to create allies. And so sometimes, again, I'm a conservative Republican, but my allies may be a liberal Democrat, and I might disagree with another conservative Republican. But sometimes on some topics, conservative Republicans are the best people for me to work with. And so we try to create that space of not trying to be about power, but trying to create healthy conversation to help resolve tough topics. That's just another example of something that Crossman Career Builders is all about.